Oh my god. Shaking off the fucking rust on this one, huh? Alright. Bastion, the isometric action game from Supergiant, has 3 songs. I mean, okay, look, it has a lot of music. Most of it, like, relentlessly slaps, but it has 3 songs with lyrics. It's also a very tight cast, there being 4 named characters in it still left alive by the start of the game. The kid, the silent protagonist, Rux, the narrator, Zulf, a survivor of the Aura, people who have been at war with your people, and Zia, another member of the Aura who was raised within the walls of your kingdom. Of these 3 songs, one is labeled Zia's theme, one is named Zulf's theme, and the third is the 2 songs coming together. See, Supergiant is like 4 games in by now, and all of them have had a lot of fantastic critical acclaim, and I think that's deserved, and because I'm a latecomer to the Supergiant party, I thought it appropriate to open up with a small series on how Supergiant uses music, because, like, look, it's one thing to have great music. Like, Final Fantasy has great music, Steven Universe has great music, lots of art has lots of great music, but Supergiant has shown time and time again that it's always trying to do something with the music, and how it incorporates into the narrative of each game. This isn't just the game with the bangers, and to talk about that, I gotta set a few things up. So, songs, the songs with lyrics that I'm talking about, don't come up for a while in this game, but it sets itself up pretty well. You play the kid, the silent protagonist who wakes up in the middle of the apocalypse. The walls of Celandia are crumbling, the earth is falling apart, deconstructed little patches of land rising up to meet you as you escape the remains of your home, to wind up with Rux, who explains what the Bastion is. It's not just a sanctuary to go to in the event of the calamity, but it's also a special ship that can revive the world. So, the game is pretty simple. Run off to various places, find cores, put them into the Bastion, save the world. Cool. You meet Zulf not long after, who's happy to find another survivor, at least, and he comes to the Bastion with you. Things are looking up, and along your travels you find Zia, not scared, not trying desperately to survive, just in this one spot in the game where there's no violence, no destruction, just her, singing her song. And here's where our first interesting snag comes in. So, Build That Wall is an interesting song, in where it's positioned in the game. Let me briefly pivot to the examples I listed up top. So, Steven Universe's music is, again, extremely good, but it's also music that is extremely on the nose, and that isn't a bad thing, particularly in something like Steven Universe, being a show intended for younger audiences. It's better if the songs going on in each episode hit straight to the point of the episode, but this kind of writing happens all over the place in games and TV and film, and is a pretty good, clear way to convey meaning through music. But Bastion plays a pretty clever trick with these songs. Zia's song comes in right before the midway point of the game, and up until then, the basic elements that have been introduced and are largely in play in the story are pretty simple. There's an apocalypse. You have to go put the world back together through the Bastion. It's horrific to be in this broken place, and, we're happy to see survivors. It frames it as the old world is gone, and all that matters now is surviving the new world. Pretty standard apocalypse stuff, but Zia's song seemingly has nothing to do with the apocalypse. She's talking about, like, hubris, right? About 2 people, the narrator and the subject. One who's digging holes, the other is building a wall, and every time she urges the subject to build, there's always a counter, like an implication that what they're doing is fruitless, harmful, and will only lead to their own inevitable destruction, none of which have really been addressed in the story up to this point. Until Zulf betrays you after the next mission. See, Zulf had been reading this journal Zia's father left her, something you picked up en route to finding her, and it's written in the language of the Aura, a language Zia never learned, but Zulf knows. And in it, he learned the truth about the calamity that destroyed the world, that it was something that Celandia created as a way to wipe the Aura out entirely. This happens after you learn that Celandia's war with the Aura is maybe not quite so long in the past, and those martial badges and other such things that Rux talks about with pride start to take a different tone, and so does Zia's song. Suddenly, her song about walls and hubris starts to ring kind of hauntingly prescient, something I'd consider a hallmark of Supergiant. By the time you're off rescuing Zia from the Ura, you learn that the calamity was made and caused by Celandia in an attempt to wipe the Ura out, but it instead only destroyed themselves. one day that wall is going to fall. Let me pause here to talk about some moderately heated video game discourse, unfortunately. I'm really sorry. Though, considering the delays on this video, it's not a timely observation. But there's recently been a bit of discourse on the nature of games that mechanically use violence and also seemingly criticize the player for being violent. This came to a head recently-ish with The Last of Us 2, famously. But this has been a conversation that's been circling about for a while, something talked about over the first Last of Us, Spec Ops: The Line, and in at least a small capacity, even Bastion itself. The overall effect of Bastion is, on some level, playing this kid who gets a ton of weapons and skills that you use to destroy everything in your path, to build this bastion, to restore the world, only to reach the end and realize that the Ura have been fighting you because you are, in effect, echoing the genocidal empire you came from by storming their lands and killing them for your own purposes. The game forces you to do this to progress, to use violence against them and then presumably shame you for doing just that. But all the same, I feel like a conversation about violence in Bastion is incomplete without thinking about the message imbued in Zia's song. This isn't to say that a critique of games in this field that, force you to behave violently and then presumably shame you for doing so is entirely wrong, but I do have misgivings in how it's used, and for the sake of my own sanity, I'm not going to talk about The Last of Us 1 and 2, but the problem I have in this observation with Bastion is that it excludes what I think is a relevant factor in talking about violence. We can talk about the kids' violence, wrecking monsters, destroying ruined property, killing the Ura by the end of it, but Zia's song isn't really about the kids' actions, but about Caelondia. And I get why people focus on the former rather than the latter, because you're not enacting Caelondia's genocide plan. You didn't press the buttons in the game that made the calamity happen, but you do control the kid. You move him around, swing his hammer, fire his guns, kill the opposing Ura, and the game spends a lot of the first half ribbing you whenever you break one of the petrified people, but that reads to me more like misdirection than the core of the game's philosophy, more like tarnishing a gravestone than judging you for being violent in absolute. This is a hard argument to balance here. I do get that the kid does things that may be ethically questionable on his own, but it's only done so in the context of his people. For the first half of the game, violence is at times regrettable or nuanced in regards to the petrified people, but ultimately a necessity. The calamity has destroyed the world. It's his job to try to put it back together, and these monsters and hazards stand in his way. Whatever he needs to do now, it's for the greater good, and it's only by looking at violence at a larger scale, a history of violence in this world, does the commentary start to come together. The kid is, on some level, culpable. He's absolutely responsible for the lives he takes near the end of the game, of course, but the greater act of violence may be less of his swinging, slashing, bludgeoning, and shooting, and more what he's fighting for. A kingdom that builds walls, that built a false hierarchy, one that enforced its rules cruelly to those who didn't fit in, those who built railroads over land that wasn't theirs, and a kingdom that ultimately destroyed itself in an attempt to wipe the outsiders out. This is why the final choices you get to make are so important, and also what I feel is something of a weakness on the part of this game. For all this beautiful culminating moments in these two choices, spare Zulf or don't, and activate the Bastion or don't, I can't shake the feeling that they're almost false choices. Not in the sense that they aren't fully realized decisions with their own endings and whatnot, but to me, when I got there and the game asked me if I wanted to spare Zulf, I almost felt insulted that they'd ask in the first place. Zulf hurt you a lot over the course of the game. He destroyed the Bastion, sent his people to it, killed your pets, and most likely, and as it became clear that his actions led to you coming to the Ura's home, to destroying them, killing everyone who stands in his way, the Ura turn on him, leaving him nearly dead by the time you get there, and, well, leaving him there to die felt like learning everything that Caelondia did and throwing it in his face, becoming just like the people that caused this nightmare in the first place. The second choice is even more strained. Rux literally tells you that the Bastion will just rewind time, but there's no assurance that Caelondia won't just start the calamity over again. In fact, he doubts that they wouldn't. What is the point in believing in a world that would do such a thing over and over again just because Rux and you have a history there? a life that's gone now, clinging desperately to the past, to the point of denialism. This is ultimately the real delight of Zia's song, and something that doesn't get replicated as well as Zulf's or the ending mashup of the two. Like, they're both great songs, don't get me wrong, but they underscore events that almost feel like overwhelming. Like, Zulf's song is really beautiful and sad, but I'm already thrown by the first time in the game I've disarmed myself, carrying his body through the attacking Ura, valuing peace when finally given the option to set my weapons down. The song enhanced all of that for sure, the same way that the two songs coming together at the end really helped to highlight the ending of the game, but ultimately, Zia's song stands alone in what it does in this game. It tips the game's hand in this moment in time where you have nothing else to do but sit and listen to her song. The song slots effortlessly into the general tone of the game's already excellent score, and it says a lot about Zia in that moment, that amid the chaos of a broken world, instead of standing in horror like Zulf did, or picking up a weapon like the kid did, or dying like everybody else did, she plays her song. She sings in this oasis of peace, and like, God, every moment of this is perfect. Like, okay, so the escape ending, where you don't turn the Bastion on, but you, like, set sail on it and try to find survivors, all we've seen of the New World has been broken, wild, and violent, except for a couple moments, like a few small places of peace, one of which, the first of which, was Zia, who barely has a word to say in this game directly, but through all of this adversity, she remains friendly to you, optimistic, sweet. You rescue her, quote unquote, but she's not in chains. She's not trapped. She went with Ira to learn about her people, and she agrees to go back with you. And until you get to the very last part of the game, the only words you've heard from her mouth are the lyrics to her song. This slightly haunting song about the end that was always going to happen. It's about who gets left out of a conversation of violence. We can talk about the kids' moral responsibilities, but we're arbitrarily limiting a conversation of violence in this game if we don't talk about Ceylondia. Alright. Special thanks to Evan Kearns, Alistair V, D.R. Baker, Pahor, Maria Aladren, Brandon Haney, and Narai the Remarked. I dig my hole, you build a wall. I dig my hole, you build a wall. One day the wall is gonna fall. Gonna build that city on a hill. Build that city on a hill. One day these tears are gonna spill. So build that wall and build it strong, 'cause we'll be there before too long. I build that wall up to the sky. I'm gonna build that wall up to the sky. One day a bird is gonna fly. So build that wall until it's done.